going to go back a stage from being a really quick sponge cake to a Christmas cake. Christmas cake needs a slightly different treatment to any other cakes. Because if you think about it, a normal family fruit cake, you have a 2 or 3 egg cake mixture and maybe half a pound, maybe 3/4 of a pound of fruit. Whereas a Christmas cake, you have a 3 egg cake mixture and you have nearly 2 pounds of fruit. So unlike the pineapple cake, where each piece of fruit is surrounded by quite a lot of cake mixture, for the Christmas cake, you've not got very much cake mixture and you've got an awful lot of fruit. And you've soaked the fruit for a day or two in half a bottle of port. And you don't want it to dry out. So when you make a rich fruit cake, you don't put it in the baking oven, you don't put it in the roasting oven in the roasting tin, you just put it straight in its tin in the simmering oven. You do not faff about wrapping it in brown paper. You do not mess about wrapping it in newspaper and string. You just line the tin, you put the cake mix in the tin, you put the cake in the simmering oven. And it goes in for roughly 1 hour per inch of cake tin. This is an 8-inch cake. This went into my simmering oven for nearly 8 hours. And it came out yesterday just before I left. And it cooled down in the car. And it very nearly didn't make it.
Same with the square tin.
Square tin, it's around an hour. The mixture I've given you, the recipe I've given you, is sufficient for an 8-inch round tin or a 7-inch square tin. If you double this recipe, it will fit a 10-inch round tin. If you do 4 times this recipe, it will fit a 12-inch round tin. Half this recipe will do a 6-inch round tin. So with the one recipe I've given you, you've got a 4-tier wedding cake. In the Aga book, Mary Berry, Queen of all Agaland, Queen of the television these days, she has the most amazing selection of recipes, both in ounces and in grams, doing every possible size and shape of cake. And then she says that her 8-inch round rich fruit cake will take between 5 and 15 hours to bake. She means it. And all too often in the run-up to Christmas, in fact every year, I meet somebody who's doing the recipe from the Aga book because it's lovely, and they think 5 hours. And so they put it in at tea time to get it out after supper. And they are the person who is up on the hour, every hour, throughout the night, checking that the cake is done, and it still isn't done, and finally at 4 o'clock in the morning it is done. So do not be tempted to put your cake into the oven any time after lunch. It needs to go in after breakfast. You can always mix up the cake and assemble it and put it in the tin, cover it with cling film and put it in the fridge or the larder overnight. But if it goes into the oven at breakfast time, it's got all day and all evening not to cook. If it's bigger than about 10 inches, you can put it in at bedtime and get it out at breakfast. I know that a 12-inch square wedding cake base in my Aga takes 15 hours. So it goes in at bedtime and it comes out at lunchtime the next day. As ever, it takes twice as long to cool down as it did to bake. Leave it to cool in the tin. Once it's cooled, I tend to give it a good old dose of alcohol while it's still in the tin. Then I turn it out of the tin and I wrap it in greaseproof or foil and I put it in a cupboard for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or I eat it that day. You don't have to mature it for very long if you don't want to. It is perfectly possible, if you're eloping to Gretna Green, to make your cake and take it with you. It won't be quite as mature, but it will still taste fresh and fruity. So there is my Christmas cake, my rich fruit cake. Lovely piece of Bako Glide. Somebody cut up chocolate brownies on it, so I cut it down to fit the cake tin. When you ice it, turn it upside down onto the board so you've got the perfectly flat base when you put the icing and the marzipan on. And you really do need once to icing or marzipan it. Don't give it any alcohol for a week before you're going to do anything with it. It needs a week just quietly absorbing what alcohol it's got before you then unwrap it, you put it on your cake board, you brush it with boiled apricot jam. The reason you have to boil the apricot jam is if the jar has been open for several weeks in a cupboard, you never know what's got in there with it. So you boil it to make it stir up. You brush apricot jam all over it, you cover it with marzipan, and you put it in a box and you leave it for 24 hours or a week. Then you ice it on top. And depending on whether you're icing it as a wedding cake or a Christmas cake or whatever, you either just buy ready rolled icing and roll it out and drop it on, or you make royal icing and you make little snowmen out of it. You're going to eat this exactly as it is. I might put some icing sugar on the top for you to show I've made an effort. But I'm not actually going to ice it as a wedding cake because otherwise we'll be here all day. What have you been doing? What do you do with it? Did you hear that? This lady is an utter genius. Rather than having a million cake tins, she lines a saucepan with Baker Glide and bakes a cake in it. Brilliant. Genius. Write that down, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. That's wonderful. That's absolutely brilliant. And then they're all the right size.
Absolutely.
And you've got a bake. Oh, I love that. Thank you very much. Did everybody hear? Use a saucepan instead of a cake tin for a rich fruit cake. Then it means you haven't got a million different sized giant saucepans, not saucepans, cake tins hanging around the house. Oh, I do like